daily Washington Nationals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody. Locked On Nationals podcast here. Josh Neighbors, your host. Joining me tonight, it is Matt Weyrich of NBC Sports Washington. Matt, appreciate you coming on the show. We are now in the offseason officially, staring down. Everybody wants to get excited. Everybody's thinking about, Scott Boras is talking, saying things about what might happen, But the real deal is we're staring at a lockout. That's kind of the square one, right?
Yeah, I mean, we can get all excited for sure, but I don't think we're going to be seeing a ton of crazy movement until MLB and the Players Union have a new CBA, and it's probably not going to come before the December 1st deadline. So we're definitely looking at some kind of work stoppage now. Whether that impacts the regular season, I don't think so, but there's a lot of things that need to be hashed out, so it's not going to be pretty.
Yeah, before we get to the lockout stuff, so Scott Boras had some comments yesterday, and I mean, if anybody read them as anything except for like fluffing up his guys, it's they're wrong. Obviously, the stuff pertaining to the Nationals was the Juan Soto stuff, right? It was the fact that he said, Juan wants to play for a winner. I think most Nationals fans' retort to that would be, well, they won 2 years ago. They won a championship 2 years ago. And obviously, Scott Boras is aware of he has some clients who are on that team, but he's aware of how that team was constructed. It was older guys, right? It was a lot of older guys, and they're shifting into a new space now. His job, though, is to get the best deal for his client in the best situation. And I still think the best situation for Juan Soto is the Washington Nationals because they are at a place financially where money-wise, they can make the commitment to him that nobody else can guarantee they can make, right? Like there's some other teams out there, but the Nationals money-wise are set up in a place with the contracts coming off the books. They could make Juan Soto the $500 million man if they wanted to.
Yeah, he's definitely the player that would be worth that kind of money. Coming down to his age, coming down to the production on the field, what he brings from a marketing standpoint. I mean, he checks all the boxes. He is somebody who could be a Mookie Betts, a Mike Trout, a Francisco Lindor, a Bryce Harper, because he's worth that much more, not just because of his production, but everything else. I think the comments from Scott Boras, they didn't really strike me as surprising. I mean, even putting aside the fact that what player doesn't want to win, the whole situation that the Nationals are in right now, where they're completely shifting their focus to building their farm system and building out from the bottom up, that's not something that's conducive for a player signing a long-term deal. They want to know that they're going to be on a competitive team and not one that's stuck in a rebuilding phase. And when the results aren't there, like they weren't this season, like they weren't last season, you kind of have to, as a player who's thinking about, is this a 15-year contract? Like you want to sign with a team that is going to be able to compete for the extent of that duration. And, for Soto, that's going to come down to results. And, it might not be something that happens this offseason. I don't think that there's going to be, one splashy signing or two that convinces Soto to sign some extension. It's going to come down to what this core that the Nationals are building of young talent turns out to be. And, coming into this offseason, it definitely seemed like it would be priority number one for the Nationals to re-sign him and sign him to an extension. But from Boras's comments, it doesn't even seem like he's willing to go to the negotiating table right now. So I think that at the very least kind of signals the Nationals need to be all in on building around Soto, and they can't afford to miss, or they might miss out on, a generational talent.
Right. But to me, the big thing is we saw last year, like he is so good that it makes it really easy to build around him. That's something to me that stands out. It's, if I'm talking to Scott Boras, I'm like Rizzo, I'm saying, look, we brought in Kyle Schwarber and had Trey Turner, and all it took was 3 guys, and the lineup was gangbusters in June. And that's all it took. Like, I mean, that's really the selling point, because if you pair him, even if you don't pair him with good guys, the guy was almost won an MVP award. I mean, and let's be honest, the second half of the season, the offense wasn't the problem, right? The pitching was. The bullpen losing 41, 42 games, whatever it was. Like, he's so good to the point where, he doesn't have to be in a lineup like the Dodgers lineup or the Padres lineup. Guys like Bryce Harper, and he's definitely on that caliber, maybe even a better hitter than Bryce Harper. We'll see what people think when these MVP things shakes out. But, these guys can carry an offense, and the Nats aren't going to ask him to totally carry it, right? But we know that, Mike Rizzo knows how to build a team. And so that's what I would say to him is, what is like, where do you want to go to the Dodgers? You want to go play, you can't go play for the Dodgers. Like, money wise, it just wouldn't it wouldn't work. Like, you can't actually go play for the Dodgers. I don't think money wise they have enough money. So to me, I would just say, like, hey, sit tight. Like, we want to extend you, but we have some things we have to figure out first, right? The pitching contracts have to come off the books, before we really understand, what we're working with here moving forward. We're not making any big moves this offseason. I think the re-signing of Alcides Escobar shows that they're going to move in a certain direction to me, right? They're going to see where the young guys are. They're going to try to ride out these pitching contracts. And then, all right, what are the young core that we can keep? Okay, now we build. The Nats are 2 years away, really, in my opinion, or a year or two away from being serious contenders. But I don't think the serious contendership is something that takes a long time to build, because you can start assimilating pieces along the way.
No, yeah, this 2022 season is going to be extremely critical for the Nationals in a lot of ways. You obviously have the young players, as you mentioned, that are going to get the chance to prove whether or not they can stick at the major league level. But you also have Strasburg coming back off of injury, him looking to show that he can still pitch a full season. Thoracic outlet syndrome is no joke, and it's something that a lot of pitchers have struggled with when they've tried to come back from it. So the Nationals are just going to have to take that as it comes. You have Patrick Corbin, who's, still halfway through this contract that he signed with the Nationals prior to the 2019 season. And, the Nationals would love for him to still be a contributing part of their rotation, but he's going to have to prove that he belongs, because over the last 2 seasons, the numbers show that he's been one of the worst starting pitchers in all of baseball, at least among those who have been regular starters. So he's going to have to, make some adjustments and take some step forwards. And then you just have the farm system and the guys that are coming up that aren't even in the major leagues yet. What is Cade Cavalli going to do in his second season in the minor league level? Is he going to reach the majors? How is he going to fare there? Is Cole Henry going to continue to prove? Jackson Rutledge, can he come back off of the injuries that he suffered this past season and really put together a full healthy campaign? There's a lot of questions up and down that organization, and they're really going to have to kind of figure out where they're going to go. And that next season is going to determine whether or not 2023 is a realistic target or more of a pipe dream for them. And that's going to weigh heavily for Soto for sure.
But here's the problem I have. It's like, he's 23 years old. It's not like he's like 30, right? Not like 32. Like, I think he's a guy who can sit through a losing season or two, to be honest. Especially if they're willing to make him the $500 million man. You can put up a little bit of crap. And also, like, I don't think he's going to be out of the loop on the vision, right? There's no chance that he's out of the loop on what the team is trying to build. I'm sure he understands what the team did last year. It's a real, but also, 88 games won this division, this year. And you can make the argument if the Nationals actually kept everything intact this season, they would have been there. So it's not like it's some, really far-reaching, far attainable goal. I think a lot of what Scott Boras said is kind of being blown out of proportion, and also it's expected, right? Like you said, like, was anybody surprised by that? I did enjoy the, Milo Conforto getting so many calls. Everybody wants Milo Conforto. I'm sure a lot of teams are kicking tires on him, but the interest, to what extent, we'll see. And we'll see with Juan. I don't think the extension's coming this offseason. That seems to be your thought too.
Coming into this offseason, I think that the Nationals are going to make an offer. I think they did last offseason. They tried to sit down and talk some negotiations. I don't know if a formal number was ever put in place, but I think they at least try to advance things a little bit further than they have been. Now, whether or not Soto is willing to listen and whether or not they're willing to, really hash things out, at this point, it's probably looking unlikely. But I will say that I think the Nationals are at least going to try, or at least, you have to if you're the National. I don't know how you could possibly go through this offseason and not at least try to see if he's interested in working something out.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. All right, let's talk about like the impending doom, the CBA, right? I've mentioned this a bunch. What's your take on this? These two sides have not seemed to come to terms very easily. Whether no matter who the characters are in the plot, whether it be the '90s, whether it be the 2020s, the agreements are few and far between. So, what are you hearing, and what do you think in terms of a work stoppage and CBA negotiations?
Yeah, well, as we saw in 2020 for the pandemic shortened season, these two sides are not nearly, close enough to working things out. The relationship is as fractured as it's ever been. There's a laundry list of things that each side wants implemented in the next CBA, and each one is going to be used as a bargaining chip for the other. And that's going to take a lot of time to work out, especially between sides that have been so contentious and so willing to leak things to the media. I think that's just, right off the bat, something that will show you just how contentious these things are. If you're willing to work things out and you're willing to meet halfway on certain things, you're not leaking stuff to the media. You don't want to give up that leverage. You're the fact that we're hearing all of this publicly is a pretty bad sign. And it kind of quieted down over the past year after they got the COVID season going. I think both sides had some kind of an agreement to stop leaking things and try to work things out. But clearly, as the deadline has drawn closer, they've only grown farther apart in negotiations. And like I said before, I don't think that it's going to end up impacting the season next year. We might have a shorter spring training. Maybe, we get pushed back a week or something like that. But I think we'll still have a full 162 game season, playoffs on time, all that good stuff. It's just a matter of working through all of this stuff and trying to find some middle ground where there isn't a whole lot of it.
So you're an optimist. You do think that you're gonna be, hey, I don't worry, we're gonna see the full season.
Yeah, I'm gonna take the under on if we were to put the start date a month late, I'll take the under. I'll say it happens before that.
Yeah, so I'm with you on that. I don't think it's going to look clean because, like, we saw these two sides. I remember how bad Rob Manfred managed that. I remember he said, "I'm 100% sure it'll be baseball," and then 2 weeks later, he was like, not anymore. Sorry, we're going back on that." I mean, it's just these two sides have really struggled to do it. I will say this, like, we can't be using the DH as a bargaining chip, right? Like, it's just one of those things where if you watch the World Series, and I said this last show, I'll say it again here. Nobody was like, "Thank God Framber Valdez is up." Thank God we get to watch Ian Anderson pick up a stick and swing some. Like, that's the World Series. Nobody's there. Nobody's paying to see if Ian Anderson get a double and not going to run. It's not helping. It's not good for the product. I always say this. Like, in the NFL, they don't say, "All right, 2-point conversion. The punter has to play tight end." Like, nobody does that. Nobody actually does that. So, where are you on that? Like, do you think that's going to be a bargaining chip, or do you think we're going to be like, "All right, good to go, we're rolling"?
I think it's definitely going to be a bargaining chip.
Come on now, come on.
Well,
Why
look,
can't we
first
just
of
all
all,
get along?
I like I like National League Baseball. I like the strategy of it. I know it's a tired take, and I know it's gone. It's going to be gone. We're going to see, the DH in the National League. I just think it's kind of juiced baseball. It's changing the rules to create more runs, but it also protects player health, and that's where the bargaining chip side of it comes in. Is the players' union needs it. It creates 15 more jobs all in the National League for veteran players who are paying
It's a
members of
better
the
product
union.
though if the pitchers aren't hitting. It's a better visible product.
A better on the surface, yes, but I would say the intricacies of the game is lost when you do get rid of the DH.
but it's an
Totally,
entertainment product.
this is very true, and that's
Yes.
why. Look, this is not a hill I'm going to die on. Like,
Okay.
I
Good.
have my opinion. I
Right.
prefer to watch it a
I
certain
understand what you're
way,
saying. Yes. Yeah.
but I won't argue. That there's a ton of pros to adding the DH, no doubt about it. But like I said, the Major League Baseball is going to use it as a bargaining chip because they know the players' union wants it, and MLB wants expanded playoffs bad. So I think that is going to be, a kind of, okay, we'll give and pull right here, get some more teams in the playoffs, get more TV, big TV right deals, all that kind of stuff, because that's where the cash is, and that's what really matters to baseball at the end of the day.
Do you see the Nationals getting active? Because we saw Andrew Heaney sign it. I think the reliever market is one space where maybe before we have the work stoppage in as 20 days now, the freeze in 20 days. The reliever market's the one kind of market where you could see some movement because those kinds of deals don't really affect you in the long term money side of things, unless you're signing an Andrew Loop for $30 million for 3 years, right? So, do you think the reliever market, where we know the Nationals need to be semi-active, making the right kinds of moves, is that a space where you think the Nationals we can see them be active?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you're going into next season with your closer supposedly being Will Harris, which is not really a position you want to be in, considering
Right.
he, like Strasburg, is coming off a thoracic outlet syndrome surgery, and you don't really know what you're going to have from him. Whether or not he's even ready for opening day is still probably a question that they have to answer. So that right there is something you have to address. And then, we saw down the stretch, Kyle Finnegan's not a closer. I mean, I think he
Right.
can be a valuable reliever. But he was thrust into situations that he was not prepared for and he is not equipped to handle. And I think that that's the case for several Nationals relievers. And not to say that they can't be setup men or closers down the line, but this is a lot of unproven arms. It's not all Wander Sueros. There's a lot of guys in there that really haven't been around a whole lot. And the Nationals were having to throw them into situations where they were, really put pressure on, and we saw them falter in those situations. So I think the Nationals, at the very least, are going to want to get 1 to 2 relievers just to put in the back end, some veteran guys where you can have this domino effect that, okay, we can still give a lot of these relievers that we see promise in opportunities, but they're not going to be the 9th inning in a 1-run game. They're going to be, the 5th inning in a 9-5 game where your starter got lit up. Those are the kinds of situations that you want to see them build off of, because they're necessarily low leverage, and that's how you're going to really build a strong foundation of a bullpen, as opposed to just finding 1 or 2 guys that really are hitting the jackpot and automatically coming through in those 8th and 9th innings.
Yeah, like Finnegan to me, and also Mason Thompson are 2 guys like 6th through 8. That is where those guys can be. That's where you want them to be. And I thought last year was unfair to Kyle Finnegan, right, with what happened and putting him, unfair in the sense of like that's not where he wants to be, but the Nationals had to have him there with all the moves they made. But that's a guy that I think that like we know for a fact can pitch a 7th or an 8th, right? That's a guy that we know can be. Mason Thompson has all the looks of a guy who could be an 8th, and maybe eventually one day a 9th, right? Maybe that is, his destination in the end. And like you're saying, Will Harris to me is the perfect example. So is Brad Hand of, sometimes, man, signing these guys, like it doesn't work out because it's such a crapshoot, with what happens in the back of bullpens. I mean, I remember when Paul Sewald showed up for the Mets, and I was like, this is a fictional person. This is a created player, a fan jumping in the bullpen. They gave him a jersey, and his name is Paul Sewald. And guess what? He was awesome. He was awesome this year for Seattle, right? This guy who did a great job there. And we've seen guys like Tyler Clippard and Blake Trinan and Jerry Blevins, have success and have struggles in certain places. It's just kind of the nature of the business. I think kind of finding those Kyle Finnegans is where the Nationals might win, because that was a guy, that for them is just they have control over for a while, right? It's a guy who's 30 years old and he's still under control. I think it's going to arbitration pretty soon, but still, like, those are the kind of guys they have to hit on. Are you kind of agree, or do you think you can kind of splurge for a 2 for 20, 3 for 18 type of guy?
I mean, I'm probably not going to give any multi-year deals to relievers. I think
Yes.
generally a multi-year deal for a reliever is a win now move. I mean, you're paying for what you think they will be next season, and you're giving them guarantees beyond because they're good enough to warrant it. And you're not in a position to be going in on this season. You need, like you said, you need to see what Kyle Finnegan has. You need to see what Patrick Murphy, Mason Thompson, Andres Machado. I mean, these are guys that showed signs at different points this last season. Ryan Harper's another one.
Maybe the Seth Romero, right? I mean, he needs to come along.
Yeah, yeah,
be part of this thing at some point, right?
Exactly. And Sean Nolan could end up in the bullpen. Eric Fetty might get an extended look in the bullpen rather than having him jump back and forth between the rotation and relief corps. So, you've definitely got to leave room for these guys to get those opportunities, but you just want stability. And you find somebody, it can be a 1-year deal. It can be a little bit more high priced. You could go for, a guy who's been traditionally a setup man, but you're giving him a chance to close. Ryan Tepera and Andrew Chafin are 2 that stand out to me. In that regard, who would not be very expensive, estimate between 5 and 8 million for next season. You give them a 1-year deal to be your closer, I think they jump at that. So, you find that veteran, somebody who is a good clubhouse guy, somebody who's going to be able to, show the younger guys how to do it. And then, you get through next season and you really have a better understanding of what the bullpen you have will look like moving forward.
Last question for you, Matt, is do we think Zim comes back for one more year?
I think he will, but I think the Nationals need to not, if the Nationals look like they're going to lose 100 games next year, I don't think that Zim comes back. But if they
Right.
make, if they make at least one, or two somewhat respectable signings, like, they go get an Eduardo Escobar and a Steven Matz, right? The two solid veteran players who at least, give the Nationals a chance on a given day. I could see Zimmerman coming back for that. He's 16 home runs short of 300. He hit 14 this season. So if he can do pretty much exactly the same thing he did last year, I think he'll want to do it, try to get to 300. So, it's definitely going to depend on how the Nats do. And just like last offseason, it's probably going to come down to very late in the offseason before he makes a final decision. But I would say he's still firmly on the fence, despite what we saw in that last farewell game he had.
Yeah, that part of it too. And also, like, he's having a kid too, which is, the force coming along. So you're like, man, to your point, do you want to come back and play for a team that's, not necessarily trying to win it all? But I mean, I will say there is a certain value to the Nationals having a lifer national World Series champion in a period of time where they're trying to find, all right, who are the real guys? Like, if I'm Mike Rizzo, I'm talking, if I have Ryan Zimmerman next year, it's a guy I'm having come in my office all the time being like, hey, what do you, are these guys part of a core? Like, what do you think? Give me your thoughts. That's a guy that's got so much knowledge. And to the knowledge end, what do you think about Ryan Zimmerman being the FP Santangelo replacement in the booth? Maybe do you think that would be a potential? Because I don't see Ryan Zimmerman, like, it's tough to imagine him away from the Nats, right?
Mm-hmm.
It feels like he's always going to be kind of associated or near and around the Nationals. So, what would you say to a Ryan Zimmerman, being the color commentator for the Nats?
I don't think he'd ever do it. Just his general attitude towards the media. Not to say that he's rude, but he's got that dry humor. Just this type shtick that he's kind of owned, and I think it could play on TV. It would be, Nats fans would absolutely love it.
They'd love
it. But I don't know if he'd be, willing to go on the road trips and cover a team, put in the work for a full season. Maybe 5 years after his retirement or something. But he's already
I would say he would at least need like a year or two before he would do it, right?
But he's already asserted a spot in the Nats front office. He has that as part of his contract for his last extension he signed, and he's getting paid. He just said it on the radio yesterday. I think it was $2 million a year for the next 5 years after he retires as well. So it's not like he's going to be looking for paychecks or anything either. So I would imagine that he kind of goes into more of a family life after spends time with his kids, spends time with his wife, as he hasn't been able to as much as a player. The booth is probably not where Sim's headed, but it would be awesome. I won't lie.
Who would be your pick though? Who's a guy you want to see? Everybody's saying Jason Worth, and I'm actually not as keen on that. As somebody as a broadcast nerd, like, I get that he's had his zingers and his moments.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, for like a 9-inning game, it's like I want Jason. If that makes sense, I want Jason Worth up there in the booth.
Yeah.
What do you think? And where's your head at? What kind of person are you looking for? And are there any names in particular you want to see?
The former player that I would most want to see in the booth, I think, would be Denard Span.
Yes, that's what I said. Let's go. We're on the same page on this. Yes,
you listen to interviews with him. He's a smooth talker. He's kind of funny. Good responses. I think he'd have a good rapport with Bob Carpenter, and Nats fans have always loved him. And he's even said that his years in DC were his best time of his career. So. If that were something that the Massa and the Nationals were to pull off, I'd be all for it.
All right, Matt, what are you working on right now, and where can people find you?
Yeah, I'm over at NBCSportsWashington.com and on Twitter at by Matt Weyrich, working on general offseason stuff, just getting ready for this long march to spring training that we have ahead of us. So stay tuned for some free agent previews and some deep dives on the Nats roster, things like that. Got a lot cooking.
Matt, always appreciate your time, man.
Absolutely. Thanks, Josh.